Hello, this is Irvin coming to you from Resilience Occupational Therapy. This is another episode in a series that I'm doing with Jeremy Lesniak. And as always in these episodes, not meant to be medically diagnostic or prescriptive in any way. Everyone's their own person.
Especially this one.
I hope you're your own person and not. No, there's a lot of different places we could go with that. But in any case, we've talked a lot about movement and exercise, and often what gets lumped in with that is stretching. I know you've got some philosophies on stretching that I think are not dissimilar to your philosophies on movement.
Yeah. I think like most of the way we view movement, we tend to view stretching. We show me the scientific paper, complete ignorance. I don't mean ignorance as in inability to comprehend, but just disavowalment of evolution and obvious collective anecdote, right? And it's led to this very, very, I'm even going to say terrible perception of what stretching is and could be for people. And, I think stretching is really important because it improves range of motion, right? If I can stretch further, I can move my body further, which if I'm, let's say I'm 75 and have a hard time reaching overhead, that's great. If my further ability to reach overhead and grab things, that's great. That's really important. But maybe I'm looking at it from an athletic standpoint where my shoulder only wants to go this far, but in the sport that I play, it very well could go this far due to some contact. Well, the easier with which it can move in that final range of motion, the less likely I am to get hurt. And, whether I'm an 8-year-old playing flag football or I'm a professional athlete of some fashion, not getting hurt's a good thing, right? Nobody wants to get hurt. So if me stretching and having better stretching capacity keeps me from getting hurt, well, then great. But here's the thing: when we tend to talk about stretching, we're lumping a few things together. And the first thing I do is I split out the concepts of flexibility versus mobility. Flexibility, if I'm laying on the ground and I'm asleep and you pick up my foot, Irvin, and you bring it up towards my head, how far I can do that, that's flexibility. How far I can move my own foot in that same posture while I'm awake, that's mobility, right? The ability of my body to be moved versus my ability to move my own body. And flexibility is always greater than mobility, but not always by a lot, right? It could be by a teeny tiny amount because it can't be the other way, right? The biggest thing that people neglect when they're having these conversations is the role that the nervous system plays. If you've ever done something, let's say you stepped, you slipped, your body went to a range of motion, your leg kicked out, and you were there, and then you went, and your body and your leg locked up, and you spent the next 2-3 weeks limping around. Well, why did that happen? Because clearly your body was able to move in that way. And the contemporary perspective is, oh, well, you tore your muscles. Well, maybe you have strained something, but why did that happen? And just so everybody knows, stretching correctly is not tearing muscles, just as lifting weights to build. That's not there's no micro tearing going on in the muscles. It's not how this works. So what happened was my leg kicks out, I slip, whatever's happening, and my nervous system says, I am unfamiliar with this posture. I am scared. I have no data about this. I need to prevent you from going further because if my leg, your leg, sometimes nervous system's first and third person for me, and the leg goes out far enough, what if I can't get it back? I don't know. I don't have any information on this. So it goes and pulls you back in. And this is why manual therapies like ART can be so effective because you can convince the body, hey, this really was okay. And when we dig into the science of stretching, that's really what we're doing. We are convincing our central nervous system that this range of motion is safe for me. And this is why I draw the distinction between mobility and flexibility, because flexibility, I can use gravity to increase my range of motion, but if I don't have the ability to move my own body through that range, I can get myself into a lot of trouble.
Okay. So in a translating and I like your use of the term flexibility versus mobility. I think was the term to
Mhm.
use. Um, the more the way I write it up in my clinical notes is passive versus active range of motion.
Sure, sure.
But
Same idea.
yeah, so it's the same thing. I guess I'm curious in there where the idea of warming up tissue before stretching it comes in. Well, like the idea of the
Yeah.
idea that when our tissue doesn't feel warm, that's when it's more vulnerable to tearing or injury. Do you feel that that's what do you think is going on there when you have cold tissue,
The
so to speak?
concept is correct for the wrong reason. Okay. So if you I would imagine that if I'm preparing to do some kind of strenuous activity or play a sport or whatever, and I start to stretch, that none of the tissues I am stretching are devoid of blood. They have blood, they have temperature, they are warm. Now, if I move them around a bit and maybe slap my leg, I can bring some more blood there, but has the temperature there changed? No, it hasn't warmed up. But what has happened? I have reminded my central nervous system that this range of motion is safe to do. Maybe I haven't been doing it for a while. Maybe I haven't done it in a week or two or a day. And the nervous system's job is to keep me safe, keep me alive. And so it is going to constantly trim back things that are risky and expensive. And we talked in a prior chat about building muscle and things. And this all falls into that same bucket of the nervous system dictating how all these things go. So what I do, and we do this at karate, that we're not doing any exercises that are meant to increase your flexibility at the beginning of class. Sometimes we'll do it later in class, but at the beginning of class, it is reminding our nervous system of the mobility that it already has. And so the example that I often give, because I think people can imagine this even if they've never been in a karate class, if I stand there and I swing my leg forward and back a few times, every time I swing, if I have a little bit of intent to it, my foot will go up higher. Well, am I adding flexibility? No, I'm just kind of moving through a range of motion, and my nervous system says, "Oh yeah, we've done this before. This is okay. I don't have to worry about this." But eventually, I get to a point where it's not going any further because my nervous system is saying, "Hey, you down there in the hip or the hamstring or psoas or wherever, don't let that foot go any further. I'm not quite sure here." And that's where we have to spend some time training at that end range of motion. And the
Mm,
reason I think it's really important to make the distinction between nervous system versus muscular adaptation or ligament adaptation is that if it's the nervous system, then we know we need to do it in a certain way. We need to do it in a relaxed way. We talked in one of our earlier segments about sympathetic versus parasympathetic state. If I'm stretching and I'm and it hurts and I hate it, I'm gritting my teeth and I'm forcing it, it actually doesn't create adaptation. What's more likely to happen is I'm just going to hurt myself because my nervous system says this action is being met with pain and stress, and I need to help the body remain safe. But if I can choose exercises that I can do in a relaxed way, I've got a much greater likelihood of improving my flexibility. And here's the one that I use most often as an example. Most people know what a split looks like or a center split. You have to hold yourself up in a center split. That requires a lot of work. And in fact, right now, not that we're going to do this, but I could drop down, I could do a center split, I could show you. But then over time, as my muscles start to fatigue and it takes more work for me to hold myself up, I've actually lost range of motion from the beginning. So how do I counteract that? I do that center split laying on my back, my butt against the wall, and legs open, heels against the wall, because I can much more easily relax in that posture.
Mm.
And this becomes some of the benefit of
So
some
you're
approaches to
relaxing in more of
yoga.
a passive. So you're relaxing in a more passive range. So is that improving the passive range or the stretch versus the mobility?
Well, in the example I'm giving, my legs have weight. So as the
Mhm,
flexibility increases, as the nervous system releases, my legs come down.
mhm.
And eventually they get to a point where I'm like, okay, this is where I've got to hang out because this is where my body thinks is safe.
So what do you
It's
think of
where
over?
it's
Go ahead.
hmm? Go
So
ahead.
what do you think of over flexibility? Because I think there definitely are people who are too flexible, and if our muscles could just bleh, and not and not keep us safe at all, then we're just putting all the strain onto our ligaments to hold our bones from and
Yeah.
such.
I created a problem weightlifting for myself that took about a year to heal quite a few years ago because I was lifting, doing a certain posture with my elbow slightly hyperextended because at lower weights it was very strong, and then as I got stronger, so. Um, but are you talking about something like Ehlers-Danlos, where
Well,
there's a
I'm talking
medical
about.
condition, or?
Well, there's that. So you've got people who have over flexibility there, but can you be too flexible? I guess is one of the questions. Is if your muscle, our nervous system is there. There's a reason why our nervous system is protecting our joints, right? If people are, I found for people who are super flexible in their shoulder joint when they're reaching behind, that they have that flexibility, they have that mobility before they um, add any weight to it. And as soon as they add weight to it, now they've put all the strain onto their ligaments, and that's when they
Sure.
start tearing things, whether it's joint capsular ligament or muscular, or whether it's actual tear. But it does seem that there are times when being overly flexible is not a good thing. And I'm just curious how you
Yeah.
straddle that.
So I would say this is the heart of the distinction, and why distinction matters between flexibility and mobility. If flexibility is, I'm not going to say it's irrelevant, but it is far less important than mobility. My ability to move through my range of motion is more important than my ability to be moved through my range of motion.
Hmm.
You called it active versus passive. And when the gap between how far I can move and how far I can be moved widens, that's the opportunity for a problem, right? Like if we could design the perfect human, they would probably have very little, from the way I'm looking at it right now, not much of a difference between their mobility and their flexibility, right? Flexibility would be a little bit more and enough that I can continue to work on it if I want to, but not this, complete, take somebody. Here's a good one. We've seen people, you've probably all seen someone who can take their thumb and like touch it back to their wrist, but they
Hmm.
can't take their thumb and touch it back to their wrist, right?
When they're
You do that enough times, and you're probably gonna have an issue somewhere in the thumb because whatever's going on is being manipulated in a way that, for whatever reason, the nervous system says, "Yeah, I think this is fine." Error on line 27 of the program, I guess. And if we keep going, there's an issue, right? Like, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that touches on it at least. One thing I often think about is that it used to be believed that you should stretch before an event. I think you definitely touched on this. That And I think there's, with sprinters, it's been shown that if you sprinters stretching their hamstrings before an event was going to be more likely to cause hamstring injury because
Yes,
they were stretching their passive range of motion so they couldn't actively keep their legs safe while they were sprinting.
right.
It used to be that you should do all these stretches before doing factory work. And so this is industry where they're trying to reduce injuries, and now they're realizing going through range of motion, as you're saying, warming up the tissue. And I put that in air quotes because whether it's warming up or refamiliarizing your nervous system with the
Mhm.
tissue, seems to be the way. And one of the things I like to recommend to people, especially when I see them stretching in a way that seems antagonistic to their body. Like
Mm.
they're grabbing one joint and they're stretching that one joint, even if they're liking that stretch. I say, do you ever see a cat stretch like that? The cats are these supple creatures that are laying around
Mhm.
all the time, and they get up and they do what is referred to as pendiculation, which is this whole body movements. Which I love the word pendiculation. It often
That's a
comes
great
with a
word. I never heard
yawn.
that word. Yeah, it's a
They've got
full
a
body
counter
yawn. They're just like,
stretch.
oh, right?
Yeah, so I would encourage, like, when you're going to stretch, make it, especially your morning stretch when you're
Mm.
going, okay, where is my body now? Make that a whole body pendiculation. Um, yeah.
I think um, when we start to look at how nature operates, and we remember that we as human beings are natural, and that the very same again, and I said this in a different one. If you don't believe in evolution, that this part may not apply to you. But assuming that you do believe in evolutionary forces, the very same things that created that pendiculation and the response, the benefit for the cat there brought us to where we are. And if we understand those natural forces, we can work with them in a much more efficient way. I can get warmed up and ready to go to do just about anything in about 2 or 3 minutes. It doesn't have to take a long time. But if I go back to the way I was originally taught, a good warm up was 15 minutes. Well, I'm older than I was then, and I'm more effectively warmed up in less time because I'm thinking about this in a little bit more natural way. And I've got a 4-part warm up. You see this at class every week. We do some moving around because most of us sit in a chair most of the day. We manipulate our body in a circular way, right? Just moving things in circles. If we move our joints in circles, if it's elbows and knees, right? Don't make them circle. That's bad. And then we start to do something that is a little bit higher intensity, get the heart rate up a little bit because that feels good. It can also remind us of, oh, hey, this thing's off today, or, oh, I got to pay attention to that leg or whatever. And then if I am going to do some flexibility, if this is at the end of my workout, that's where I put the flexibility training. It's the last thing I do. I want to do it when when I'm not doing other things, which probably means that I'm tired, which probably means I can't relax. And that's where I find the benefit.
For people who want to increase flexibility in general, you seems like you're saying low intensity, get comfortable in that.
It's accumulating time. If here's and I'm looking at our time, and I know we've got more that we're gonna record. So here's how I would encourage people to think about it. There are a lot of people who have a hard time with their posterior chain, right? Psoas, glutes, hamstrings, right? That whole chain. Because what do? We spend most of our time sitting in a chair. I'm sitting in a chair. I think you're sitting in a chair right now, Irvin, right? And if this is as far as I ever go, that's fine. But if I want to go further, but I've accumulated so much time in this range of motion, well, that becomes a problem. How do I solve that? I have to accumulate time that counteracts this. Now, I'm probably not going to be able to go one for one, but I can't expect that 30 or 60 seconds twice a week is going to be enough to combat 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 hours per day in this posture if the two are in conflict. If I'm telling my body, this is where I want to be, and then I say, no, but I want to go lower, my nervous system has to decide, okay, is this signal over here just an outlier? Can I ignore it? Because you're asking me to do a lot differently, and that's inefficient. Efficiency is what has kept us alive for all this time. So to me, flexibility, mobility, however you want to look at it, stretching is less about intensity and it's more about accumulating time in a relaxed way.
Nice. Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Resilience Radio. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show. The music was brought to you by Aaron Marcus with their tune Some Biological Process. If you want to hear more, we've got at least one more episode with Jeremy coming up, and we've probably got other episodes in the future.
We do.